Hey, what's happening out there, fellow humans? I hope you're all feeling fantastic. I have a fun throwback review for you guys today. The tagline for this one was, "When the streets are a jungle, there can only be one king." That's right, everybody. I'm diving into the Van Damme classic, Lionheart. This is a movie I just grew up watching countless times. I absolutely love it. I'm going to break down the short history of this movie. I'm going to give you guys my quick review, as well as rank all the prize fights Van Damme has in this one. So let's wrap this intro up and dive into everything that is Lionheart. This movie was released internationally in 1990, with the US release coming in January of 91. It opened in the US a strong number 3 behind Home Alone and Awakenings. It had just a modest budget of $6 million, and it would turn a nice profit, pulling in just over $24 million worldwide. And this movie had a string of different titles depending on the country that you were in. This film was funded independently, so it was sold out to various distributors. So depending on where you were, this movie could have also been known as AWOL, Leon, Wrong Bets, Full Contact, and of course the title I always knew it as, and the one that I actually think sounds the best, Lionheart. Now, this movie essentially came out in what would be Van Damme's third year as a headliner. He had a smaller role alongside Sho Kosugi in Black Eagle, and his breakout role in Bloodsport in '88. In '89, he had Kickboxer and Cyborg. Then in 1990 would come his turn in Lionheart, with Death Warrant coming a little bit later that year. Also, be on the lookout for a throwback review of Death Warrant coming very soon as well, by the way. And I would say, much like Arnold was early in his career, Van Damme, up until Lionheart, didn't really do a lot of dialogue. I mean, sure, he certainly did have his lines, but they were condensed. There just wasn't a lot of meat to the dialogue that he was given. Primarily, he was relegated to one-liners, short statements and such, which I will admit did sort of give his characters a bit of a flat, one-dimensional type of vibe from just the aspect of personality and emotion, but Lionheart here would be the first film to kind of change that trend. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Kickboxer. It's easily a Van Damme classic, but his acting in that one was iffy at best when he wasn't fighting, and I think the difference between the level of his performance in Kickboxer to that in Lionheart just a year later is absolutely night and day. Now, from doing my research to get ready for this video, it appears they actually filmed Death Warrant prior to this one, but regardless, in that movie and here in Lionheart, there was a considerable amount of growth in the layering to his performance, which I certainly think did help solidify him as an A-list talent in the action genre. Now, before getting into my quick review of this movie, let's run down the plot and the cast of characters. As for the story here, Van Damme plays Leon Gaultier. He's a soldier in the French Foreign Legion. He gets word that his brother in LA has been in a gangland accident and he's in the hospital, so Van Damme goes AWOL. He escapes and hides out on a tramp steamer heading into the US, but the only problem is the ship arrives in New York. Van Damme from there stumbles into an underground fight. He meets the wise but quick-talking Joshua. Leon has no cash and he needs to get across the country to LA, so he reluctantly befriends Joshua, who manages him in a high-class underground fighting circuit, but naturally his brother dies before he can get to LA, so all the money he makes from fighting he gives secretly to his sister-in-law and her daughter to help them out, but he's actually unaware that a couple of soldiers from the Legion are still tracking him down. As for the cast surrounding Van Damme, I think they were all more than effective for a fun action movie. Harrison Page was the true co-star. I loved the chemistry that he and Van Damme had together. Page has been a capable TV actor since the late 60s. I remembered him from the amazingly cheesy show Sledgehammer that had a couple of just comical seasons in the mid-80s. And I really do think he does a great job of cementing the bond between these two characters, and I think he was able to really allow Van Damme to play off the emotional sincerity of his own performance to just make their friendship feel natural throughout the course of this story. Next up was the family that Van Damme was fighting for. Lisa Pelican played the sister-in-law and Ashley Johnson played the young niece. I think both were more than serviceable for this film. Pelican isn't really given much to do other than being the protective mother and the grieving widow, but I do think she makes it work with her emotional delivery. And I think Ashley Johnson was adorable. She had a great chemistry with Van Damme in their few scenes together. I think it is just more than endearing enough to really understand why Van Damme is fighting to support them, and even earlier in his career here, Van Damme showed that he really could work along great with child actors, much like he did with Kieran Culkin in '93's Nowhere to Run. That leaves us with Deborah Renard as Cynthia, the ruthless fight organizer that routinely looks at Van Damme like he's a pork chop just off the grill. She brings some cartoonish villain vibes to the role that I think are fun. She's a character that you need to hate, that you want to hate, and I think she makes it easy to do so. She has an arrogance and a bit of gravitas to her that does result in some appealing 90s villainy. And this movie also had Brian Thompson, who was a fantastic 80s movie villain. He's Cynthia's bodyguard here. I do think he was wasted. Thompson at the time was still very much an imposing force. I think he killed it as the Night Slasher in Stallone's Cobra back in '86, and I think it would have been awesome had he been given more to do than just standing around looking tough over Cynthia's shoulder, but regardless, he does what he can with what he has to work with here. Now let's get into my quick review of Lionheart. I think this movie delivered a great blend of action, storytelling, and character motivation. Like I said, Van Damme brought plenty of heart and emotion to this role. I think it was certainly his most humanized and vulnerable character at the time, and it all blended perfectly with his capable action persona. He really is fighting for something bigger than a trophy or revenge here. He's trying to help the only thing he has left as a family, and as melodramatic as it sounds, it's all the perfect recipe for cheesy 90s action intrigue. The progression of the story isn't really that unique. The supporting characters are all a bit recycled as well, but the movie takes itself seriously. Director Sheldon Lettich frames the drama nicely with perfect doses of emotional theatrics, and it adds just a melodramatic score, which is all more than enough to make the frequent fight sequences actually mean something. The competition for Van Damme continually gets tougher, the stakes are increasing, and with it comes the tension that you feel while watching, so even if you've seen it before, it can still pull you in and have you invested in the journey that Van Damme embarks on in this world of high-class underground fighting. He's a man with a kind heart, living in a world of snakes. He's a bit like Robin Hood, wanting to give to the poor and thinking that there's good in everybody. And I think this is where Harrison Page as Joshua comes in as the perfect dose of reality for Van Damme. He's that reminder that the world can be a very ugly place and that being overly naive will get you trampled over in life. And like that, there are other small nuances that Lionheart provide, which I do think make it a slightly more complex actioner for its time. It certainly is no think piece, but it does provide plenty of substance to wrap around all the fighting. And as for all the fighting, I would argue that this could possibly be the most action-filled of all of Van Damme's action movies. Outside of the handful of prize fights that he has, there are still a handful of other action sequences, from his escaping the Legion in East Africa, to the alley fights, to evading the Legionnaires and more. The already quick runtime is just littered with non-stop action. That is all, surprisingly enough, fit kind of naturally into the flow of the story progression, or at least naturally enough for the needs of an action movie in the early 90s, and that's my review of Lionheart. And with that in the books, let's rank these prize fights to see how they stack up against one another. But before we get into that, I highly recommend checking out a video after this one, of course, over on the Real Viking Samurai channel. He did a complete breakdown of all the fighters in Lionheart, and it's a great watch. The guy has an awesome channel. He loves these 80s and 90s actioners. He's got a love for martial arts, and the detail that he brought into all these fighters in this video is certainly worth checking out, and I'll make sure to leave a link to that video down in the description below. So in this movie, Van Damme essentially has 6 fights for money, and 5 of those fights happen underneath the thumb of Cynthia. At number 6 on my list, I have the racquetball court fight. It is a fun sequence. It kind of reminds me of Stallone versus Thunderlips in Rocky 3. It is a quick scene, but I mean, seeing Van Damme put this guy through the glass delivers a nice charge of intensity. At number 5 on my list, I put the fight against Sonny in the garage. It isn't really a fight, but it does deliver one of the best lines in the entire movie.
Kind of pretty. I don't know if I want to fight you or fuck you. Ooh, Sonny.
It may be just me, but from the passion in his eyes, I think he's aiming for a little bit of both. Everything in this one ends with a quick nut shot, and the swing of intensity was a charming one at the time. It's kind of a cliche move now, but it was a cool scene back then, outside of this, of course.
Are you okay? fine. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
Yeah, you know, in some cultures, they only eat vomit.
Up at number 4, I picked his first fight for money when he gets to New York and meets Joshua. It's a textbook fight sequence. The choreography is decent, and Van Damme gets a couple classic moves in to put the big guy down in a heap to the surprise of the crowd around him, and it's all a bit traditional, but it does work. And at number 3, I picked the pool fight, probably on simple setting and wardrobes alone. The leotards are just classic 90s, and the direction of the scene is fun overall. The editing is just pure 90s action with the quick jump cuts and the repeated shots, but Van Damme is just soaking in the sun and the bravado. He takes a small beating, but ends up the victor in what I think is still a capable sequence. Coming in at number 2, I put the warehouse battle with the Scottish fighter. I think this was certainly the most elaborate of the fights in this movie, and I think it holds up extremely well. Van Damme definitely takes a beating. They're climbing all over these cars, beating the hell out of each other, and the result is a 90s movie fight that still holds up great today with plenty of blood, violence, and fun momentum swings. Which, of course, leaves the final showdown with Attila at number 1. Admittedly, the warehouse fight was more in-depth, but how can you vote against a heavy who steps into the film with a gorgeous set of lamb chops, a turtleneck, and a fluffy pussycat? It's a solid movie battle overall. You have heightened stakes with the Legionnaires in attendance, and the methodical progression builds plenty of tension and uneasiness to make it a worthy finale in a film stuffed with action. The game of cat and mouse is riveting. The musical scoring heightens the emotional intensity nicely, and despite knowing Van Damme will win, the fact it routinely feels like an impossible feat, I think makes everything work when put together. And I think that wraps up everything I have to say about Lionheart. I hope you enjoyed this throwback review. This movie still holds up. It's certainly an underrated Van Damme flick. He showed he really had more to offer than just kicks in this movie. He showed he can bring sincerity and emotion to his characters, and showed that when given the opportunity, the sky was the limit in terms of charisma and leading man capabilities. Thanks for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I have more videos on the way, so be on the lookout and let me know what you think of this throwback Van Damme flick down in the comments below.